So here's the deal.
It's
We were talking, and we've had a conversation here and there about the landscape of criminal activity that surrounds the world of professional wrestling and combat sports.
mhm.
It is baffling. Like with all of the stuff that's going on now, it's even more baffling if you look back in at the history. Now, you could probably say the same thing about a lot of sports that draws people from a lot of different walks of life into one area, right?
Of course.
You would think that.
Yes.
But some of these characters and activities inside of the guise of professional wrestling have always, like I've said before, have always kind of gone unchecked, so to speak, because wrestling has always kind of lived in its own little bubble, right?
Mhm.
Nobody wants to admit that things go on over there because then you have to admit that, like, oh, that's a real thing in any
Well,
way, shape, or form.
with all the Vince McMahon stuff going on, and now Billy and a few others, the wrestling business it's always went hand in hand with arrests. Now the level of arrests usually are assault on marks at bars. That was always
Yeah.
famous. You know what I mean? Haku biting people's noses off, and he didn't go to jail for like if Seth Rollins was to bite off some fan's nose at a Dave and Buster's after a wrestling event,
Mm-hmm.
it'd be some fucking shit to pay. Right, and
Well, yeah.
he'd be in jail. So like Haku, they got away with it, but majority of the time it was assaults. Now you're starting to hear some pretty crazy stuff come out of the woodwork that a lot of people knew, but if you compile it all into a big pile, you're like, oh my goodness, this is only 40 years of modern wrestling, right?
Yeah, if you were to look back, I mean, you have your Saitos throwing things through the front of a, McDonald's when they were on a road trip. Criminal activity like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have some for whatever reason, way too many drunk driving episodes.
It's
People
ridiculous.
getting pulled over for DUIs
Way too many
for no
DUIs.
reason. For no reason in this day and age, or any day and age for that matter. There's no reason. There's way too many options out there, but it happens a lot, way too
Mhm.
often. We've kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. It's almost to the point where those are almost to be expected, and those are the low levels because of the severity of some of these other people. Okay. For example, are you ready for this one, Bradie? As you can see right there, on Mr. Nick Gage. Everybody's familiar with Nick Gage, Combat Zone Wrestling, GCW, everything like that, right? Well, back in 2010-ish, he decided to walk in and rob a bank for a big grand total of $3,000, ladies and
Mhm.
gentlemen.
American USD.
Well, yeah, okay.
So Canadian, that's about 7,500
Oh,
bucks.
shut up. Now, how about this one instead?
Oh, Mr. Mulligan.
Mr. Blackjack, look at the Lone Star beer headband. It says it's a Lone Star beer headband with the butt ends of bullets.
See, this is like when I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 and I'm on my horse and I'm just
Right?
going fishing. This is the face I feel like Arthur Morgan is making the entire time. Just give me some chewing tobacco.
Between Blackjack and outlaw Ron Bass. It was just
God, fucking romp.
there was
with Dick Murdoch in the back with 2 cases of beer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fucking dirty
You're probably asking yourself, what the hell did Barry Windham's dad do?
Yeah, I don't. Just
Right?
some crazy shit.
Well, it turns out that in 1990, he, and remember Barry's brother Kendall?
Kendall Windham, yes, Kendall Windham. He had a run during the Monday Night Wars on Thunder, but he still had a run. Yes,
lanky fella,
very lanky,
very lanky, right?
Mhm.
With the boots.
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that the old father and son duo were arrested back in 1990. Okay, after an investigation from the Secret Service What? And the
Excuse me?
Florida,
Sorry?
yeah, the Secret Service and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The charge? Counterfeiting.
Oh,
Over
no.
$500,000 in phony 20s. And they got 2 years in jail for it.
I thought the DiBiase's were the first father and son
Well,
crime lords.
apparently not.
Holy
Apparently.
shit.
So,
Oh, for fuck's sakes. Johnny.
good old Johnny K9, John Croix, Bruiser Bedlam.
Okay, so people watching that
Mhm.
are new to this channel and just new to
Sure.
you and new to me.
Yeah.
Johnny was famous a few years ago with Dark Side of the Ring. They made him infamous, I guess is a better word,
Mhm.
with doing a documentary about basically him. And outside of before Dark Side of the Ring, the only time you'd ever really hear about him is somebody reminiscing on a podcast like a Jim Cornette or something like that. And then you've seen him on crime documentaries for bikers and the mob and a few other things in Canada, if you were to look into some of the Canadian mob documentaries. But Dark Side of the Ring blew him up.
Mhm.
How we know Johnny, more so you than me, we're from the area
Mhm.
that Johnny was predominant in.
Absolutely.
And we were both involved with the wrestling industry at the same time that Johnny was in the area.
Mhm.
You,
What?
if the listeners haven't seen or listened to any previous episodes of this, were trained by the lovely Johnny K9.
He is one of the
Or
gentlemen.
not so lovely Johnny
he's one of
K9.
he's one of the humans that I credit for that. Absolutely. There's no secret. So Johnny K9, who happened to be a member of a biker gang called Satan's Choice, for those of you that don't know, back in the day, he was a Satan's Choice motorcycle gang guy, and in the late '90s, him and some of his buddies allegedly blew up a police station. Yeah, that's right. Blew up a police station, causing about a little over 125, $150,000 worth of damage, something like that.
I think it was more than that.
Okay, might have been,
I
but
think it was a lot more
the,
than that in
the
terms
money
of
of
damage.
the money of the times.
The money.
Now,
Okay. Yes.
then allegedly, Johnny K9 was hired to take care of a lawyer and her husband for somebody else. Never ended up going through because of evidence problems, and then charged with another one. But again, nope. Trial was stayed on that one, though. They finally got John to plead guilty on conspiracy to commit murder. And then, he ended up doing some time for that. But the murder they got him to commit, the murder they got him to admit to, or the conspiracy of, I should say, was towards other motorcycle gang members. So, other bad people, apparently. And then Johnny got out and got put in, he was living in a halfway house afterwards, and was told never to go back to a certain part of the world. And he ended up back in that part of the world. And then he ended up mysteriously dying in a halfway house.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, mobsters and gang members don't like it when you don't listen to what they say. You can also look back far enough and talk to Dino Bravo about that one.
Well, if I'm out here panning gold, I feel like I'd be collecting fool's gold if I didn't ask you that you spent a lot of time with Johnny. Did you ever know,
No.
without incriminating yourself, or did you have any idea that he could have been a kind of guy that would do something like this?
I mean, you always, yeah, okay. Johnny had a way of, he could fly off the handle if he didn't like you. There's no doubt about it. I've seen that side of him, but I've also seen the other side of him, with his stupid voice, just, oh, what the fuck, being a happy guy. Right. You always imagine, knowing who he knows and the ties, you're always like, oh yeah, I could see where he could be capable of doing something like this. It's never even brought up in conversation.
Well, that's good
Not
to
even if
know
it was
about your
just a
character.
tourist. Not even if it was just the two of us. Not even brought up in conversation. You want to know why? Because if I don't know, I can't say shit.
Well, and it was a separate portion of his life, and you've heard
Yeah,
people that knew him pretty well
yeah.
would kind of say that. They said he didn't bring any of those worlds in together,
Nope.
right? Like he
Nope.
kept them separate. He knew, and I was that his respect for what he was doing and trying to keep his mouth shut, or was that the respect for the wrestling industry because he loved it so much? Because
I think a
that's
little bit.
undeniable. There's not a single person that says that Johnny wasn't all about the business. That's just his demons got the fuck a hold of him apparently, and he was, I guess, a bad person.
Here's the thing. I think it's very easy to, if you're that kind of a person, though, I think it's easy to be all about the business because, especially at the time, we're talking like Smoky Mountain days. We're talking Jim Cornette. We're talking a life of kayfabe.
Maple Leaf Gardens.
Inside of professional wrestling, everything was fucking kayfabe still, right?
Yeah.
Well, his entire life was that. So he's able to really embrace that wrestling lifestyle because to him, it's just it's just another thing that I can hide behind. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
If nothing is real, then nothing is real.
Exactly. And your morals start to bleed into that if you're not careful as well.
Yeah, 100%. So those of you that don't know the story of the Rockin' Rebel was actually a protege of the Rock and Roll Express, trained by both Ricky and Robert. Apparently, had some run in ECW, early on.
It was Eastern Championship Wrestling when he first started there, right? Yeah.
But later found himself into a situation where the police were called, and he was holding his wife, if I remember correctly, holding his wife hostage in a closet with a gun to her head, and ended up shooting her and taking his own life in a murder-suicide. Yeah, that's right. Oddly familiar, huh?
This episode's getting heavy, man.
Oddly familiar. Well, these are criminals, like straight up criminals, and some of it has to do with CTE. I get that, but then there's other ones that
that just found this because of our thumbnails. Like, yo, I thought they were going to make jokes.
Well, listen, there's no jokes when it comes to some of the crimes that these people have committed.
Well, guys,
there's been a pattern. There's been a crazy, you know what I mean? This has been going on for years and years and years, and everybody has just done the same thing. Like I've said, you look at the world of professional wrestling and you think, we don't want to admit that anything happens over there. Just let them be, right? Well, unfortunately, you have stories like this gentleman right here.
Oh, Mr. Harrison.
Now, for those of you that don't remember, Hardbody Harrison was a guy who had a run in WCW. Prior to that, I think he had some AWA stuff.
He was a pretty well used worker on WCW Saturday nights.
This guy had set himself up with a school.
Yeah, yeah. I know where you're
but
going.
Inside of this school, he was using this with his gang buddies as a front to kidnap women, force them into sex trafficking and forced labor, sexual abuse, all under the guise as letting people know that they were training to be pro wrestlers.
So he was hard. Basically, he was a Hardbody Harrison Kelly.
Threatened to throw a girl through a hotel window if she didn't have sex with 2 customers. This is kind of behavior that's been happening.
This is borderline Vince text messages right now.
It's crazy.
Like the next text message or next thing you were going to tell me here is that Hardbody Harrison started calling them all Tuesday breakfast. And I'd be like, holy shit.
Or are we going to find out that Vince McMahon has just had a Hardbody Harrison phone this entire time, and that's what where these text messages are coming from? Will that be the defense that they use? Baffling. The amount of criminal activity that happens inside of the world of combat sports and sports entertainment.
Mind-boggling.
but we still managed to have such good, wholesome people willing to want to enter into that sphere, into that world. You know what I mean? For every one of these pieces of shit, we get a couple of Kylie Rays out there.
You're just, and you know what? You're kind of heading into what I was thinking as we're talking about this. So when you look at wrestler deaths, yes, for the amount of wrestlers that have been in the industry, it is a large amount, and it's unfortunate. But if we're talking about actual like sick, twisted pieces of shit, not your DUIs, not the altercations that happen. I'm talking like these crazy bastards. If you think about the number of people that have been through wrestling, I guarantee the NFL has a higher number of fucking like, and that's not me saying anything against the NFL. What I'm saying is, I don't know if wrestling really produces that many pieces of like murderous shit.
Well, I mean, we didn't even talk about.
There's tons of them.
We
Go
didn't
through the
even
list.
talk about Douglas Witten.
Okay, keep going.
Douglas Witten was a guy who a self-proclaimed independent wrestler in like the Mississippi area or something like that, who met a family at a church after leaving like a rehab center, and they took him into their home. They offered him, a place to stay, get on his feet, and he literally bludgeoned and stabbed his way through all 4 people in that household, including a 9-year-old boy, and then stayed in their house like he was going to get squatters' rights.
For fuck's sakes. Let's take a quick ad break, and when we get back, we can do a little bit more digging into the ever evolving world of professional wrestling crime.
I'll do you one better.
I'm KJ. It is I, KJ Johnson from the Colossal Tussle Podcast, back again with a classic clap back with KJ, and let us talk about October the 11th, 1999, a Raw is War episode. We want to talk about how Michael Cole is one of the greats, on commentary. Well, how about this one? Rock bottom into the dog poop. Rock bottom into the dog poop. Rock bottom into the dog poop. That's right. The Rock versus the British Bulldog in 1999. Raw is War. A big old plate of dog poop slid into the ring. Rock bottom. Michael Cole with a legendary call. Rock bottom into the dog poop. A tremendous night in pro wrestling history. One that has lived in this dude's memory for ages. And Vince McMahon, ladies and gentlemen, he paid to lick dog poop out the arse of a Shih Tzu on this day. And until next time, I've been KJ. I'm KJ.
I mean, speaking of deviants.
Well, it's kind of maybe it's guilt by association, because he's guilty for something, and he's associated with us, and we just made him a part of the criminal episode. So,
are we sure that was even the right one?
I don't know. Do you got another one? Let's play another one.
I feel like, because there's a few of them in here. I don't.
I'm KJ. Hey ho, a classic clapback with KJ Johnson from the Colossal Tussle Podcast. I welcome, come on in, October the 9th, 2000, a year-long storyline. Stone Cold Steve Austin ran over at Survivor Series. By whom? We didn't know. The investigation continued all throughout the year 2000 until October 9th, 2000. Mick Foley, Commissioner Mick Foley, he came down, brought down the Rock, got us into business. He was going to unveil, and who was it in the end? Who was the culprit to this biggest storyline of 2000? Well, it was a fat man in a thong. That's right, Rikishi, and he did it for The Rock. History-making moment, a glass-shattering revelation that would change the landscape of pro wrestling for about 6 months until we got to Triple H. But that's a story for another time. But speaking of stories, let's talk about how that Thanksgiving that year, Vince McMahon sacrificed a turkey by biting its head off and serving it to the Samoan gods because, hey, he did it for The Rock.
we could be talking about criminals inside of pro wrestling. And I mean, that's a complete other podcast all unto itself.
It very well could be. You could indulge into each episode as you go. There's lots of people on YouTube doing that. But guys, if you're watching on YouTube, we'll be back on Sunday with another episode of the Law Live Audio Wrestling with an amazing guest. I'm not even going to spoil it. And also, if you're listening on a podcast provider or SMNE Radio, if we actually gave this to them, come over to YouTube, check us out here so you don't miss any of this stuff.
Oh, yeah, that part.
Yeah.
Okay.